I'm Ara Trembly, and we're here today with Michael Fitzgerald, Senior Analyst, Celent, and Drew Birtwistle, Product Marketing Manager, Camilion Solutions Incorporated, to talk about simplifying ISO product content updates to achieve speed to growth and reduce costs. Now, it's no secret that many insurance carriers face the challenge of keeping their products up to date with ISO rates and rules. ISO typically makes thousands of program changes each year in commercial lines alone, and the processes used by carriers today to analyze and implement those changes are time-consuming, very costly, sometimes risky, especially if they have to interpret their own circulars. Today, we're going to hear why it is crucial for carriers to be able to more easily adopt and deviate from ISO rates and rules to achieve strategic objectives. We will also explore how new solutions within the market can accelerate insurance product development, simplify the carrier's processes, reduce risk, all while reducing costs. Mike, can you share with us why insurers rely on bureau content?
Sure, I'd be glad to. This is actually an area that I enjoy discussing, partly because for a number of years I ran a personal lines automobile system at a carrier, and so I lived the challenges involved in this day to day. Let me step back for a minute and explain how a bureau works. A bureau is a company that produces and maintains insurance product for their members, and the members are insurance companies, and they subscribe to the bureau service, and ISO is one of the bureaus that is in this space. The reason that an insurance company wants to subscribe is because they actually want to piggyback on what the bureau does with regards to producing the products and then maintaining them and filing changes with the states. So insurers seek two things: speed as well as efficiency, which means lower costs when they're dealing with a bureau. Additionally, when we ask insurers, they say that using a bureau makes their product development process easier, as well as allows them to introduce new products and enter new markets faster.
Okay, so what are the primary business drivers for using bureau content?
Well, if you're an insurer that it has a pure bureau-based product, a commoditized product, then that is your product that you're taking to market. So they desperately need bureau-based content and bureau-based updates. Most insurers, however, change the bureau content in order to meet a couple of strategic objectives. One of them is to differentiate their product in the marketplace, and another is to tune their risk appetite to be more in line with what they would like to write versus maybe what the bureau filing has been.
And what challenges are insurance carriers facing today with implementing, updating, and maintaining bureau content?
Well, the challenges really has to do with numbers and the fact that what we think of and we describe as an avalanche of forms. When we've done our surveys around this area, we've found that companies actually change or introduce new forms at the rate of 4 times the rate at which they retire forms. So if you think about that, every year that stack of forms that has to be maintained and changed gets bigger and bigger. In fact, it reminds me of, you remember the cartoon, The Jetsons?
Sure.
At the very beginning of the show, they have George Jetson stepping onto a treadmill and taking his dog Astro for a walk. And they start out at a nice leisurely pace. But the treadmill gets faster and faster and faster until pretty soon George falls down, Astro steps off the treadmill and watches his master go around and around and around, faster and faster and faster. And that's very much what it feels like when you're on this treadmill of forms and having to keep up with the updates. Bureau-based content really helps out with that.
So why do you think insurers continue to struggle with the complexity and effort associated with incorporating ISO rates, rules, forms, SIC codes into an automated workflow?
Well, there are really 2 main reasons that we see. Number one, this is an area that has not traditionally attracted much investment. It's seen as a clerical type function, and although it's important, it really doesn't get the attention, the care, and feeding that some other areas do. The second reason is there really haven't been superior tools and processes that help insurance companies meet these challenges.
So how do insurance carriers primarily handle ISO updates and deviations today?
Well, organizationally, it's usually a centralized department which exists inside of a business function. But if you ask them, what's your performance like? Typically what we hear back is poor. In fact, 25% of the companies that we surveyed said that they would throw all of their processes and tools out and start new because they were just too outdated and they worked so poorly. Only 16% identified their performance in this area as truly superior. Most companies miss the ISO or Bureau filing dates because they just cannot get the changes or get their changes made in time in order to meet the dates.
And how's the vendor community responding to the market for an easier, flexible way to update and maintain the thousands of ISO rate changes each year?
Well, what we've seen, and this is the good news, is we've seen the vendor community respond to this need of their customers in a positive way. Two areas really to discuss. One is automation, and the other is process. On the automation side, we've seen the maturity of products and automation called product factories or product configurators. And basically what these allow an insurance company to do is to take a product, pull it apart, and separate it into parts, which can then be reassembled in different ways. So if you think of an automobile manufacturer and who's building trucks and SUVs, what they've been doing for years is they've been building them on a common chassis and then changing and rearranging the parts to make a truck or make an SUV. And what that allows them to do is realize cost benefits as well as speed benefits in the manufacturing. And this type of automation is exactly what insurance companies now are getting from vendors in a highly mature manner. The second area is process. And here the story is not quite as positive overall in the industry. For years there have been services to update bureau forms, bureau rates, bureau rules, but typically insurance companies have been very wary about participating in these kinds of arrangements. In fact, our survey data shows that less than 10% of insurance companies actually outsource their forms or their rates or their rules filings. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because unless you have a stellar performance in this area, an insurance company should be very wary of giving their product control out to a vendor. And that's typically what we've seen.
All right, well, thank you, Mike, for your information and insight.
Sure.
Next, we'll be speaking with Drew Birtwistle, Product Marketing Manager, Camilion Solutions, about how modern policy administration systems handle ISO rates and rules. Drew, Camilion recently made an announcement about being the first ISO electronic rating content associate. Can you tell us what this means to the market?
Sure. So what this announcement introduces is really a new way for insurers to manage their ISO content updates. So ISO has introduced electronic rating content as a product for vendors and carriers to essentially accelerate their product development and implementation processes. What's new about this is it's not just your conventional rate tables and all that sort of thing, but it actually includes interpreted content. So ISO has interpreted their own circulars and their own state manuals and come up with an electronic format for distributing the tables and the algorithmic information for use on implementations. At Camilion, what we've been able to do is build an automated import process to bring that content into our policy administration solution, Authority Suite, and then through product configuration, bring an unprecedented level of self-sufficiency and control to the process for insurance carriers.
Okay, so based on your experience, are carriers staying current with ISO Bureau content, and what are the challenges that they are experiencing with managing updates, deviations, ongoing maintenance?
Yeah, we're finding that they are not staying current as a sort of a general statement. Those that are staying current are probably doing so at great expense. The ISO content is quite important nowadays as carriers have growth strategies. They're trying to sell more of their existing products or perhaps launch new products into new markets, new states. And The ISO content provides a competitive baseline for those highly commoditized products so that they understand what the market in general is offering, and then they can figure out how they're going to compete against those offerings. But also in large commercial and specialty lines, it provides really important information about risks that they may not have a lot of experience with. So, you know, in this kind of economic times and times of growth for these carriers, the content is very important, but it's a volume and complexity problem. If you're going to rely on the ISO content, you have to keep up with the vast number of changes, as Mike already mentioned, and then just the complexity of even understanding these changes. If you're going to do it yourself as an insurance carrier, you have to interpret that content. You have to read the state manuals, you have to read the circulars, understand what they mean, and then produce specs for your own IT team. If you're using a vendor solution, traditionally those solutions have been either a little too limited, it's just a rater, and you have to figure then how to get your own custom requirements into the process, or it's a complex code-based system that either your IT group or a vendor has to manage for you. So all these things kind of combine together into a situation where the carriers aren't filing on the ISO effective dates, and in some cases they're 1, 2, 3, or perhaps more ISO releases behind.
So how is this approach faster, less expensive, and less risky for carriers? And how does this provide more simplicity?
Okay, so the key is combining this ISO electronic rating content, which is interpreted by ISO, with sophisticated product configuration capabilities that we offer in Authority Suite. ISO is interpreting the content, so what that allows Camilion to do is build an automated import process so that we can build what we call insurance product definitions for our customers. Insurance product definitions are complete ISO products that with all the data capture screens, all the rates, all the rules built in, so you can actually get a pure ISO quote right out of the box with these definitions. But the real power comes from combining the product configuration capability, and this is also where the self-sufficiency comes in. Customers can configure their own custom requirements on top of the ISO product definition, essentially extending them. And we believe this is a big step up in the market for insurers not having to rely on vendors, and also to gain a lot of control over the content themselves. So to sort of more directly answer your question, it's faster and cheaper because we're able to get the product definitions to our customers through an automated import and testing process. We don't have a huge team of people interpreting any of that. And for that reason, it's also more accurate, so less risky. And for our customers, it's faster and cheaper to actually build their own custom requirements on top of the ISO base, so they can simply tweak the loss costs if they're a pure ISO kind of provider, or if they want to add their own competitive kind of features to the product, they can configure those through Authority Suite's product configurator. And it's faster and cheaper because they're not doing that through code, and they're not relying on us to actually do it for them.
All right, interesting. So you mentioned a lot about self-sufficiency, but what if a carrier doesn't want to be self-sufficient? What if they prefer to be more dependent on the vendor because basically they don't have the internal resources?
Camilion also offers a full-service ISO solution. It has all the same benefits that I just described as the self-sufficient solution, but all the changes is Camilion is actually doing the work of configuring the carrier's custom products on top of the same ISO product definition. So we do offer that for carriers that need that, and self-sufficiency is always an option for the future in that scenario.
Okay, Drew, so if insurers want to know more about how they can transform the way they are developing, updating products today, how can they find out more about Authority Suite?
Well, they can visit the website at www.authoritysuite.com, or they can contact me directly on my email or by telephone, and that information will appear at the end of the video.
Thanks very much for being with us today. And I want to thank both of our speakers, Mike Fitzgerald and Drew Birtwistle, for being with us today. This is Ara Trembly wishing you a pleasant day.